swans is, of course, by definition, you can't know what they are until they actually have happened. So that's really my answer. I don't have a black swan because, by definition, they don't. Can't be forecast.
That's right. I think, one issue that has been in the headlines a lot has been all about underfunded pension liabilities and repercussions from that. And knowing where I am, I know the subject is a very hot one over here. So I think the question is about what Meredith Whitney said a couple of weeks ago. Municipalities basically unable to maybe live up to their expectations of paying down debtors at some point. So I guess, what we want to get from everyone here is, some of your thoughts in terms of what you see happening on the issue of underfunded pension liabilities and state budgets. My answer to that is that there is nothing better than the stock market going up 30% for 10 years every year. It really, with 3% GDP growth, it relieves a lot of problems. But we haven't seen that in a while. So maybe, a good omen is what's happened in recent weeks, and the fact that at least economic activity in the last 6 months has picked up quite a bit. But it's not something that we forecast for the next 10 years.
I think the problem here is about baby boomers. If you look back to when pensions were first put together, you could get a pension at the age of 65, and the reason why that was the case was because life expectancy was 65. People hoped that you'd drop dead, but if you didn't drop dead, you might get a pension. Now we have people in the States retiring at the age of 60. But life expectancy is up to maybe 80 or thereabouts. So people now expect to have a 20-year, I wouldn't describe it as a holiday, but they expect to have a 20-year period of rest at the end of their lives. Until recently, that was relatively easy to fund because the baby boomers were swelling the ranks of the working population, even as life expectancy went up. But the baby boomers themselves are now going into retirement, and so what you end up with is a kind of inverted pyramid with lots of people in retirement and not so many people in work. And the problem is that the pension system can't cope with that. And so if you've got unfunded future pension liabilities, you effectively have to reduce people's pension entitlements. I mean, you certainly can pray for strong stock market returns, but that's not something you can really base policy on. And you can do that either by getting people to work for longer, so you raise retirement age, or get them to work for longer per week, so you raise the number of hours worked per week, or you cut back on people's holiday entitlements. You can do all these kinds of things. They're all pretty unpleasant, all incredibly politically unpopular, but that's what you have to do when your pyramid inverts.
Yeah.
I was at a presentation once that was being given by muni bond trader, and he showed a slide in which had the default history of muni bonds, and very low, very steady, not expected to increase, and it reminded me a lot of another slide that I had seen a number of years back regarding the mortgage market and the prime borrowers, the Alt-A and the subprime. Prime borrowers, very low, never going to go up, nobody expected it to happen, and then lo and behold, not only did we started with the subprime, Alt-A certainly got hit, and even the prime borrowers. So I'm not convinced necessarily that we're going to see the number of defaults, that are being talked about, but when you look at the underlying credit fundamentals, and at the end of the day, I mean, that's what we do. That's how we invest. The numbers just don't add up. That's why I look at the Greece situation, and I think something has to be done because they can't continue to support that level of debt. Now, what kind of debt relief do they get, and how does it happen? That's yet to be determined, and whether it's called a default, an official default, I don't know. But I look at that sector and that market, and I think the numbers don't add up. Now, not all of them are going to default, but some of them, they don't make sense. So I do expect that to increase in the future.
Just a quick comment. I think to understand Munich, you talk about Europe, and what you talk about in Europe is, look, the problems in the European Union were well established, but when did the ECB act? When did they have to bail things out? It wasn't until the spread started to blow up, because the market always moves faster than the government's ability to keep up with it. So let's talk about me and the municipalities. Is there a problem? Does the market see a problem? The spreads are fine. If you look at the way the munis are trading, they're trading with the market confirming it. So regardless of what any other strategist says, and I respect everybody's view, the market doesn't agree with them. And if there's going to be a problem in the muni market, I would suggest to you, you're going to see it in the market first before defaults come. And at this point, be it spreads, be it the underlying instruments themselves, they're not showing any signs of a problem.
Well, what happens in the economy affects everyone. So, it was no surprise that you have an economy that's contracting, revenues contract. I remember being in Florida about 5 years ago with Dade County, and they had expectations of the economy and price of real estate going up 20% per year for the next 30 years. And of course, they estimated that spending was going to increase at that rate. And of course, nobody had anticipated such a collapse in housing prices. Of course, housing prices go down, revenues go down, real estate tax revenues go down, and the rest, of course, is history. So I think that growth in the economy is very much welcome by everyone that collects taxes. So we have a low unemployment rate, returns on investments start improving, and we talked about these underfunded pension liabilities 11 years ago, and at that time the same headlines were as a couple of years ago. So I do think that when the markets pretend the economy, there's a collapse in the credit fund, usually things start because, credit starts getting blown out of proportion. Credit goes where it's not deserved. So I think that, we have 4 years behind us. Things really started, the first time that they talked about subprime was in January 2007 when a bank got a significant write-off for subprime loans. So I think that we've come a long way since then in cleaning up, and I think the economy is doing better, so tax revenue should be better, and hopefully other things are falling in place. But, in the long run, there are, sacrifice and adjustments to be made, and hopefully the right people make the right decision. Sometimes the right decision politically is suicidal, but hopefully it's good for the long term. Anyway, thank you very much for your questions, for inviting us here, Carrie.
Thank you, Maria.
We had a good time. Thank you.
I'm sorry to be a party pooper, everyone, but we've run out of time. Thank you, everyone, for all your questions. I hope we got to the bulk of it this evening. And thank you to our panel, many of whom have traveled far to be with us tonight. For those of you that like to see a replay or a slow play of Jordan on video this evening, just kidding. It'll be available to members on our website in a few days. And thank you again to our sponsors, without whom tonight would not be possible. I'd also like to thank George Dennis for his help with tonight's dinner, and Steve Fox coordinating with the media, and of course all the volunteers. Last but certainly not least, I'd like to thank the CFALA office staff, Laura and Diana. Are they in the room? Because I see them out in the hallway. Really, I couldn't have done all this without them. Let's all give a round of applause to everyone that made tonight possible. I hope to see everyone again next year. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night. Thank you, everybody.